Hey, everybody. On the Run with Beards and Dunn, back again. Beards, it's our second episode for 2024.
Yeah, absolutely. And Dunn, we just want to go back just for a second. And that was so much fun last week having Frank Shorter on. And gosh, we could have probably done 3-4 shows with him.
Well, I think, after we got done, you and I talked and we said we'll have Frank back again, I hope
for
someday,
sure.
Because we just scratched the surface.
Oh, totally. There was a bunch of things I wanted to ask him, but the time went by so gosh dang quick.
I like listening to him talk, and even Karen, my wife, she listened to it after we recorded it. It was out. She goes, man, that guy sounds like, like he could be a teacher, like he speaks so well. I go, he's an attorney, he's a lawyer.
Done.
I mean, obviously he went to Yale, it's like.
Done. I got to tell you this. So, over the years, I've been on panels and the stage speaking with Frank and Bill and stuff. And, I'm kind of you and I are both kind of country bumpkins. And, so somebody will ask a question or I talk for a little bit. Well, then Frank talks. And it's like, I feel like I'm in like kindergarten or something. But he's so good at what he does. And he's so analytical. And he, for many years, he did a lot of the NBC or whoever covered the Olympics for the marathon. I don't know why they don't bring him back because he's so good. And why not have an Olympic gold medalist there to be able to tell everybody what's going on?
And his name recognition alone would get people just to watch, even if they're not that interested, just to see what Frank Shorter has to say. I remember him doing New York City Marathon back in, I think it was 1980, 81. What year did you run your 81?
Well, no, Don, that's the thing I wanted to bring up to him. So in 1980, I come off the Queensboro Bridge onto First Avenue in first place by about 150 meters, and the ABC Wide World of Sports press truck is there, and Frank Shorter and Jim McKay, who hosted that show forever. Jim turns to Frank and says, Frank, who's this guy out in front with that real high number? Frank goes, I have no idea, but he looks like a cream puff to me.
I know. He didn't know who you were. Until that moment, he didn't know who Dick Beardsley was. And
the fact that I can call him a good friend, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, and I think I don't know. He might want to rephrase that again or something.
Well, anyway, listen, we got a big race coming up for men and women on Saturday, February 3rd.
The U.S. Olympic trials for men and women. And
in the marathon.
In the marathon. And, let's talk about that because, as a runner, that was always, the Olympic Games are always kind of like the highlight for our sport.
Right.
The Super Bowl for football, the NBA finals for basketball, the World Cup for soccer. Everybody's got their, Wimbledon, or whatever for tennis. Well, what's the runners? What is their big thing shooting for? Well, the Olympic Games. And, to get there is really the challenge because, the United States, what a depth of talent and the number of people we have and all that kind of stuff. And so, as a runner, you'd say, well, step one is to get good enough to actually even get to go to the trials.
Yeah, to qualify.
Yeah, how many guys are, to qualify for the 1,500, the 5,000, or the 10,000 on the track, that's pretty rarefied air. I mean, those guys are those genetically gifted people. The marathon's a little different animal in that it's the distance, 26.2 miles. And, the history of the event, it's kind of off the charts. And, I think what really kind of brought it home for me, and I think for you too, was, looking back, like in the 60s, and Ron Dawes, Dawes comes to mind because Ron was a Minnesota boy. Yeah. And he made the Olympic team in the marathon and he wrote a book. And I know you've got that book
Self-Made
memorized.
Olympian.
The Self-Made Olympian. And it's kind of like, well, here's a guy who came and ran the Jack 15, did road races around the Midwest, a lot of the runners. I know Bob Bartling and people like that knew him personally.
Right.
Makes the Olympic team. And you kind of inspired a generation of young runners. Like nothing's impossible. Just you may not be that talented in the track events, but again, the marathon, the endurance, the stubbornness, the training.
And the cat and mouse game that can go on in an event that takes, over 2 hours to run. It's just, you got a lot of time to make up if you run into a little bit of a problem out there.
And if you catch that, it doesn't happen at all, but you catch that, you could call it the magical day when
Right?
things are clicking. And, and we'll talk about that, like in 2000 when Rod DeHaven won the Olympic trials.
Yes.
And I think Rod's, basically his point was he outlasted everybody. He was talented. So were a lot of other guys. There are a lot of equal abilities.
Absolutely.
But a tough day on a tough course under tough conditions, it was kind of a raffle. Who's gonna pull this thing out? And Rod,
Right.
the cream rose to the top. He stuck it out and he won the gall darn thing. Went to the Olympic Games, and so another real inspiring story. And so before we got on, Beards, I kind of we're going to talk about the race on Saturday, and
Yeah.
normally our podcast comes out on Sunday. We're putting this one out. Well, hopefully people are listening to this on Friday.
Right.
The day before the race. We're recording this earlier in the week, but we're going to try to get this out before the race. Maybe to kind of get people fired up a little bit and get them.
I know I'm going to be Saturday morning, man. I'm late. I'm on the couch watching.
10:10 Eastern Standard Time. That's the scheduled start. And we can talk about that. They were going to start the darn thing at noon.
Oh my gosh.
I know.
In Orlando, Florida.
In Orlando, Florida. And I guess there was some pushback from the runners. Geez, and their agents and probably a lot of other people that are in the know. And I think they were trying to cater to TV. I'm sure.
Oh, they were for sure.
Yeah. Noon is a better time to turn on watch sports than 10 in the morning. But the athletes, to try to qualify. And what's the new wrinkle is you have to meet the IAAF standard. And it's like 2:08:10, if I'm not mistaken. It's really
tough.
A tough time. And so, if you're going to run trials in the heat of the day in Florida, humidity and heat, the odds of an athlete being able to raise his performance to that level is really, it's going to be tough. So they adjusted the time.
Yeah, and the athletes wanted 8 a.m. And so they met in the middle. So
they did in the middle. So I guess it's a little bit of everything. Okay, before we get on the air, I'm just going to give you a little history about the Olympic trials.
I love this stuff.
I know you do. 1968. And I wasn't a runner. I didn't know. I was 11 years old. But
I wasn't either.
There was they had the Olympic trials, and there was no qualifying time. Anybody could show up. They said, we're going to have a race. The first 3 finishers are going to qualify to go to the Olympic Games that were going to be in Mexico City.
So anybody could have showed up.
Anybody could have showed up.
Wow.
You just had to say, hey, I don't know if there was probably an entry fee or something.
Yeah.
But you just had to show up to Alamosa, Colorado. And, what's the elevation of Alamosa? Over 7,000 feet?
I think so.
And they must have picked Alamosa because we're going to Mexico City. So, elevation. Let's, compare apples to apples. And 3 runners. George Young won the race in 2:30. Kenny Moore, 2:31.
I didn't know Kenny made the 68 team.
He did. He was second place. And Ron Dawes in 2:33. And, those 3 guys went to Mexico City. Now,
wow.
I haven't looked and see how they did. I think the Africans, East Africans and all that were born and raised and trained at altitude really dominated that Olympic Games. But we had our 3 guys there from the United States. Well, in 72, Frank Shorter was now on the scene, and he had won Fukuoka, which is kind of the world championship marathon, I think once or twice before I think he won it in 70 and 71. And so going into the 72 trials, he was really coming into his own. He and Kenny Moore tied for first in 2:15:58. Not a super, super fast time, but the trials isn't about running fast.
No,
it's finishing in the top 3. And those 2 guys ran pretty well. 2:15:58. Jack Batchelor ended up 3rd in 2:20:30. So they had about 4.5 minutes.
Wow.
So, they were cruising up there. And so there was nothing, once they established that gap, there was nothing for them to do except just maintain. Jack Batchelor and Jeff Galloway actually came in together and tied for 3rd in 2:20:30. But Jeff Galloway had already was going to run the trials 10K.
That's
made the
right.
team. And he gave the spot to his friend, training partner, Jack Batchelor. So
yes.
This whole Florida track club of Frank Shorter, Jack Batchelor, Jeff Galloway, they all qualified to go to Munich.
Pretty cool.
And but that was the first year in 72. You were invited to come to the trials if you'd run a sub 2:30. You had to break.
That's what it was.
It was 2:30 in 72.
Okay.
And so 76 rolled around, and now they lowered the standard to 2:23. And if I remember right, I think the rationale was they had to, kind of limit the field.
Sure.
And if I remember correctly, they looked at like the 100th fastest American the year prior. And it was right around, it must have been right at about 2:23.
Okay.
And so they figured, look, if we can get the 100 best guys here, it's a manageable size field.
Right.
Plus, you're not going to have 4 or 5 hour people out there,
No.
keeping the course open and that sort of thing. Well, obviously Frank Shorter won it and he told us about that last week, 2:11:51.
Yeah.
Bill Rogers just 7 seconds behind him. They were going to tie, but Frank, I didn't know this part of the story.
I didn't either.
I had just kind of thought Frank kind of wanted to send a message to Bill. Hey, I'm number one. And when they got to the end, he put the hammer on him. But no, Bill, was cramping and said, Frank, don't wait. You just go ahead. I'm fine. I'm just going to finish and protect second place. Don Cardone was third, 2:13:54. So he was actually 2 minutes behind Bill Rogers. Tony Sandoval was fourth. And I bring that up just because you know what's going to happen 4 years later.
Right.
Before we go on from the 76, though, I was looking through the results, and guess who got 11th place at the Olympic trials in 2:19:05?
In 1976?
Yes, an SDSU alumnus.
Wait, who the heck?
I know. I knew I'd stump you with this one. We met him at the Schlitz Light 25K down in Kansas City.
Busby?
Bob Busby. Bob Busby
he got
was
fourth?
11th.
11th
place. Yeah, almost top 10 at the Olympic trials, man.
Wow.
2:19:05. Yeah, I kind of forgot that, or maybe I never even knew that he ran that well at the 1976 Olympic trials. Bob Busby, 11th place. I'm bringing this up because we do have a couple of SDSU runners this Saturday in the race down in Orlando. We're going to talk about them in a few minutes. 1980 rolls around, and the guy who finished fourth in 76, Tony Sandoval, put the hammer on him. He won the race, won the Olympic trials, 2:10:19. Benji Durden, a friend of yours, 2:10:41. And Kyle Hefner, 2:10:55. And then another friend that we just had on the podcast, Ron Tabb, was fourth in 2:12:39. So he was about a minute and a half back from third. I think the heartbreak is if you're in fourth place and you see third place ahead of you, that's got to be like, how can I get from here to there?
Know.
I'd rather get beat by a minute and a half than by a second and a half.
Well, and Dunn, we should mention this too, is that some of the big names did not run that marathon because
it's boycott.
When the Russians had invaded Afghanistan, President Carter decided we're going to boycott the Olympics that were going to be held in Moscow. So all the guys going in knew they were going to make an Olympic team, but they weren't going to be able to run the Olympics. And a good friend of mine, Gary Bjorklund, it was probably Gary's best shot at making the marathon team in 1980, and he didn't even run it. He came and ran Grandma's marathon, a month later instead, and all by himself ran 2:10:20. Yeah,
like in a time trial, basically.
Right.
Well, that year too, they had this the qualifying standard dropped to 2:21:54, and you and I have talked about that. How you nipped it.
I thought it was 2:21:56.
Well, it was.
It was because I ran 2:21:54.
I got this off of letsrun.com website. And so somebody had posted it. So I'm not going to argue with you, but yeah. And you just snuck under by a couple seconds. And then you did run a 2:20:22 at Nike to kind of solidify your trial spot. And I remember you, Beards. Let's talk about 1980 for a minute, because you were there. You were at the trials.
Yes.
And you were coming in there with a PR, correct me if I'm wrong, 2:16:20?
No.
Was it 2:20?
I had not broken 2:20 yet.
And so you went to the trials with just your 2:20 under your belt.
I went there, and that winter, I was sick all winter with anemia.
Right.
And remember that. And I remember I could hardly walk up a flight of stairs. I remember running a 25K down in Minneapolis, St. Paul area, and I finished almost dead last. Like an 80-year-old guy beat me.
Yeah. 25. Yeah, we talked about that.
Yeah. And I was ready to. I thought I'd lost that zest, and my mom finally convinced me to go to the doctor, and they found out I was just very anemic, so they got me on some iron tablets, and so done. So I went in to the Olympic marathon trials in 1980. Thinking this is it for me. I really, I knew I'd still been running and training, but I knew obviously I didn't have a chance. I'd never broken 220, but I wanted to be able to tell my kids and grandkids that, hey, the old guy, ran
Ran
in
in
the
the
Olympic
trials. Yeah.
trials. So that was gonna be my swan song. I was all set to be done with competitive running, and it was one of those days where I had no expectations, and like we were talking just a little bit earlier about, it was one of those days where I started off a lot more conservative than I typically would, and I I got over, only the first 3 or 4 miles of the marathon was run in the United States outside of Buffalo, and then we crossed the Peace Bridge, and the rest of the race, 20 plus miles about, were run on the Canadian side, and as flat as a pancake. And anyhow, done. I just kept picking off people after people after people, and I finished 16th overall, ran 2 hours 16 minutes and 1 second, and done. You would have thought I was an Olympic gold medalist. I was so gosh dang excited and done. I wasn't halfway through that shoot, and I already told myself I'm not quitting now.
Yeah. I love it. Yeah, when you knock 4 minutes off your personal best, that's going to
That
put a
was
smile on
huge for me.
anybody's face. But yeah, when you think about the 16th fastest going, at the end, that's good stuff. That's good stuff. Unfortunately, then 80. Well, I had qualified for 80, but wasn't able to go to the trials. I had an injury. It was like that IT band. I had stretched, strained, or somehow or another
Sure.
injured myself. Missed my whole the spring of 80. The track season was wiped out, and so that really was frustrating. But then you kind of re-gear up and you say, all right, back on the horse. And
Right.
And 84 seemed like, and that's kind of where we left off. We had both qualified. I had qualified for 84 at Boston. In 83 to go to the trials. And you, unfortunately, even though you had that great 208 under your belt in 1982, the Olympic trial qualifying period was actually Boston of 83. I guess up until the next Olympic trials, you had to break 2:19:04.
Well, yeah, and done. So you had about a year to do it. Well, then,
Yeah.
I hurt my Achilles tendon severely, and now these kids, which is great, they have like a 2.5 year period when they can
Window.
qualify.
Yeah, and they have the half marathon as an option as well.
Yes, exactly.
And so they give them. It's not all your eggs in one basket for a short period of time,
Right.
sort of thing. And I know it was super frustrating for you because you had to kind of try to rush your recovery.
Did.
And I don't know, we hadn't got to this part of our stories yet, but I knew you kind of gotten your Achilles back to where you were trying to train, trying to get into a race to qualify. And
well, yeah, I Dr. Bill Clancy, he was the U.S. Olympic orthopedic surgeon, and he rebuilt my left Achilles tendon. And this is like in August of 83, I think. So less than a year before the Olympic Games. And so he says, I can't, he told me, he says, you can't even think about running for 6 weeks or for 6 months. Well, done. I'll never forget where I was. 6 weeks later, I was in Thunder Bay, Ontario, Canada, not too far from where I live here in Minnesota. And I remember I went out, it was 6 weeks after surgery, and I went out for a 1 mile run. And it hurt like heck. But, back then I could take that pain and just kind of put it in the back of my head. And it wasn't long I was back, training hard, running 120, 130 miles a week. But I still needed a qualifying time. And I tried to get a bye into the trials race. And back then the Athletic Congress was our governing body for distance runners in the United States. And Olin Castle was the president and stuff. I wrote him a nice letter, and I went to a library or something, found where they had let athletes over the years in
go
certain
to the
events.
Trials.
Yeah, into the trials. I wasn't wanting a spot on the team, just in the trials. And he called me a little bit later, after they received my letter, and they had a vote, and they all voted no. And so there I was. And so I went out to California to try to qualify. And I remember about 7 miles in, I came around a sharp turn and pushed off with my left foot, and there she went. And they didn't even fly me back to Minnesota. They did reconstructive surgery out in Los Angeles, and it was about 2 years then before I could even run again.
I think I remember that race was actually broadcast, and I remember it was heart wrenching to watch. They loaded you in an ambulance.
Yes.
And had you carted off to who knows where. But
oofta.
All right, that's enough about, and but 84, the trials went on without us, Beards. I hate to,
exactly.
And a friend, I think, do you know Pete Fitzinger?
Oh, I know Pete really well.
I thought so, because he was a New Balance runner, and so were you. So I kind of thought you guys had that mutual acquaintance there or whatever.
Right.
And it was what a race, because Alberto Salazar was obviously the heavy favorite.
Well, yeah, he'd never been beaten in the marathon.
Yeah. And so Pete Fitzinger went out, took the race by the scruff of the neck, I think, as they used to say, broke away by himself, and the pack came back on him. And in fact, Alberto Salazar and they caught him, I think, in sight of the finish line.
Oh, for sure.
And it was sprint. I remember watching it on TV, and I thought, well, Alberto's going to put this guy away. Pete held him off all the way and won the race. And 2:11:43, Salazar 2:11:44, John Tettle 2:11:50. So they was tight up there in the top three.
Yeah, it was a sprint to the finish.
We'll make this fast, because after that, 1988 came around, and Beards, I gave it one last shot. My last marathon was 1983, and then the 1988 Olympic trials, and I had qualified for 80 and 84, and I thought, and I was like 34 years old at this time, and I kind of ramped up my training. I'd been running 10K road races and a few half marathons and what have you, but the marathon, that takes so much commitment and time and effort. But I thought, what the heck? And I was living in Spearfish, South Dakota that winter and teaching at the Job Corps. And I upped my mileage. And, I was trying to knock it. I couldn't do 90 to 100-mile weeks. I just couldn't. I was doing more like 70 to 80s. And there was part of me that convinced myself that, experience and memory, you try to be positive. And I'll be honest with you, I did a lot of work. I did strength work. I did, mile repeats in Spearfish Canyon in the dark with Karen followed me in a car. So the headlights would illuminate the road. Paul Young followed me on a bike one time doing a 20-miler in Spearfish Canyon. And, I was warm running 20 miles. And Paul was on a 10-speed bike going about, 10 miles an hour. I was probably doing about 6-minute miles. Well, you're not generating any heat.
No.
And he about froze like a popsicle. I'll always owe him for that one. And he hung in there with me because he had bottles of water, and he was, and he was kind of my pacer, if he would, just somebody to be out there with me. That poor guy about killed him. Well, and so you had kind of given up correct me if I'm wrong. The 1984 trials came and went.
Right.
Your Achilles was, did you have to have surgery again?
Yeah, twice. I had 2 surgeries on it.
And after you recovered from those surgeries, your running career was?
It was
done?
Pretty much done. It was pretty much done. And then in 86, early 1986, gosh, I was back running again. It wasn't bothering me anymore. And I so wanted to try to make an Olympic team. And I felt like my best shot would have been in 1984, but, injuries prevented that. So I thought, man, I'm going to give it one more shot, and so I trained, and I went out to the Napa Valley Marathon in Napa, California in March of 1987.
Here we go.
Yeah, 87. And I was fortunate. I mean, I don't think I've ever been so focused on a race as I was there. I got up to the start, and the gun went off, and I took off and hit like 5 minutes the first mile, and I had nobody around me. So I knew I just had to focus, and I had to run. What was it qualifying time that year?
Well, you had to break 2:20 to go to the trials.
That's what I thought.
Yeah.
And I ended up running. My calf, one of my calves cramped up real bad the last mile and a half or so, but I ended up running 2:16:20 and qualified. And I was, tickled pink. It was the first marathon I'd run in about 2.5 years or something like that. And so I qualified for the trials, and they were out in Hoboken, New Jersey, which is right across from New York City. And I remember because I had the fastest time of anybody going into the race, because Alberto wasn't running that race. And my 2:08 from a couple, from 82. So I was given bib number 1.
I didn't know that.
And
Oh,
yeah,
wow.
and my training had gone really, really well. And I wasn't quite hitting some of the times in shorter races that I did before, but I felt like, well, the marathon's kind of a different beast. And done. I remember the gun goes off and I go out with the lead group. And now here's the deal. So I don't want to sound like, oh, 5 minutes is slow, but we were running at about 5 minute pace, and it should have felt
Good.
easy
Yeah.
and good, but it didn't. And at about 5 miles, I'm in the lead group and I'm struggling, and I start falling off the back end. And pretty soon, Greg Meyer, we got to get Greg on one of these times. He'd be
Okay.
great. Randy Thomas, both awesome runners, they came back to where I was. They go, Beards, and they're going, come with us. And I go, guys, man, I said, I feel like I'm dragging a plow. I said, I'm doing the best I can, but I said, don't let me mess up your race, you know? So they got back up into the lead group, and they just kept further and further and further away. And pretty soon I could not see the lead pack anymore. They were so far in front of me, but I thought, okay, because here my goal that day was this. I'm either making the Olympic team or this is my last race as a so-called professional or an elite athlete. And done. It was not being able to see them, but I thought I'm finishing today if I have to crawl in. And I'll never forget this. I go by about the 23rd or 24th mile aid station, and they have a big sound system there. And as I'm running by, grabbing a cup of water, they were interviewing the 3 guys that made the Olympic team, and I still had 3 miles to go. But done. I tell you what, I came across the finish line there, and my first wife, Mary, was at the finish line, and I had a big smile on my face. I'd given it my best shot. I ran 2:27 that day. Yeah. And, so far behind, it was almost laughable. But when I got done, honest to gosh, done, I had a smile from ear to ear. Running had taken me at that level so far beyond. And I went out there that day. I gave it my best shot. I didn't drop out. I could have made up some excuse, but I thought, hey, it is what it is. And best luck to the 3 guys that made the team.
I love it. That's awesome. I hadn't heard some of that. Well, you inspired me because when you ran that 2:16 in the year earlier, because I then thought I need to get a qualifying time. And so I was training, and for some reason I was going to go to Houston. I remember I was visiting you that winter, and I was doing 1 mile intervals on your treadmill. I don't know if you remember this or not. And,
I do.
And I had gone up there in the fall and ran a 25K that around the lakes. And,
the City of Lakes 25K.
Yep. And I think I got like 10th or something, but I didn't run as well as I had in years past.
Sure.
It was that kind of, I don't know if I was getting old or it was just I wasn't doing the training volume that I probably needed to be doing. Well, anyway, I decided, Napa was in March and the trials were like in May. And so I thought, I had one shot if I was going to do it. And I thought, Napa, and you said, done. It's a nice course. There is a hill at 19 miles. Yep. But other than that, and the one hill on a course, hey, Heartbreak Hill on Boston. I mean, whatever.
Right.
It is what it is. So I think, I called up the race director, Reg Harris. Yeah, Reg Harris. And he said, Mike, we'd love to have you. I had a 2:18 PR and trying to try to qualify for the trials. He goes, there's several other runners coming that want to try to qualify. And one of them was Brett Frias, a kid from Sioux Falls, South Dakota. I knew Brett.
Yeah.
And he had ran for Augustana and didn't know him personally, but he had been training in Alamosa with Pat Porter and the Adams State team. And he was in great shape. And so it's a terrible story because, in March in South Dakota, the weather is so unpredictable.
I still feel bad for what happened to you, Doug.
I'll try to be brief, but this will take a while. I was up in our cabin, basically up in the woods almost, up in Spearfish. And I had my flight was like the day before the race. And so I heard, and there was a winter storm, a spring storm coming in. And I told Karen, my wife, I said, man, if we get snowed in, I got to be at the airport to catch my flight. And, between Spearfish and Rapid City is a heck of a drive.
Right.
And I knew a good friend, Joe Shook. I think you remember Joe was an SDSU grad.
Joe, sure.
Yeah, Joe and his wife were living in Rapid City. Joe was a pharmaceutical rep for Pfizer, if I'm not mistaken. And Joe was a runner. And I called Joe because Joe's just a good guy and a friend. And I said, Joe, can I come down and spend the night in Rapid City at your house?
Right.
So I make sure I get to the airport. Oh, yeah, Mike, no problem. That'd be great. So I get down there and the weather it's coming in bad that afternoon. I went out for like a 2-3 mile run. I barely made it back to his house. It was blizzard. The car, I got run over. It was terrible. Well, we had some supper and they made a little bed for me on their living room couch. I hope Joe never hears this because they had a newborn baby. And that little kid, I think, woke up about every hour. They wanted to get fed or something. And they had this huge grandfather clock in their living room. And that dang thing was just go tick, tock, tick, tock.
That must
all
have drove you
night.
nuts.
And every 15 minutes, the dude's like, doing, it'd make a noise. And then every hour, it would dong the number of hours. I don't know what it was. But geez, all I could think about was that either the kid would wake me up or the clock was. Anyway, I barely got any sleep. Which is okay. I got, it's whatever it is. It was, it is. Well, the weather is just horrendous. And I'm calling the airport and they go, yeah, your flight's canceled. I go, what? And they go, well, we're hoping we'll have the airport open this afternoon. So all morning, Joe and I and his wife, Joe didn't go to work. The weather is so bad in Rapid City. We sit there and Joe's like, we need to call somebody. And I said, Joe, there's nothing we can do. He goes, you're trying to qualify for the Olympic trials. You have to get on a flight. I mean, he was more stressed out over this than I was. Long story short, they opened the airport and they got me on a flight to San Francisco because you fly into San Francisco. And Reg Harris said, I'll pick you up. I called him and I said, hey, I got on a flight. I'm landing at whatever. Beards, by the time he picked me up in the airport, it was like 10 o'clock at night. He drives me to Napa. It seemed like it was about an hour drive. I get
an hour and a half about.
I get put in a hotel. It's like midnight, and the race is like 7 a.m.
Oh,
and so I laid in that motel room, and all I could do is thank you, Lord, that I am here. And I'm not going to complain about.
Plus, Dunn, you're 2 hours ahead of your time.
I was a little tired. I went right to sleep. But the next thing I know, I had set my alarm. I'd asked for a wake up call. They gave us the race. Somebody came and picked us up. There was about 4 or 5 invited athletes. Brent Frias, a guy named John Seymour from Sioux City had a 2:16 PR going into the race. And he was there. And we got taken to Calistoga Springs. Is it water? Bottled water. They make it there, and they're like the major sponsor.
And there's a town called Calistoga.
Okay. Well, they open up the warehouse. There's like 1,000 runners. But us 4 or 5, I'm not bragging, but there's 4 or 5 invited runners. They opened up the warehouse and said, you guys can warm up in here. There's bathrooms there. There was nobody but us. Brent Frias and I are jogging through this warehouse. It's all lit up. It's nice in there. It's like 45 degrees. It's a little chilly outside.
Right.
So we get to warm up in this nice building. Anyway, so about 10 minutes before the start, we head out to the starting line.
Now, how are you feeling at this point?
I'm feeling fit, and the gun goes off.
But how about the trip? Did that?
I'm just so
that, or you're too jacked up.
I'm too jacked up. I'm just happy to be there. I'm not going to worry about stuff. But the gun goes off, and I thought, we have to run 5:20 pace. We were all talking about it. You had to run a sub 2:20 to go to the trials, and everybody knew it. And so it's like, well, that's 5:20 a mile, fellas. This isn't a big secret here, or anything.
Exactly.
So the gun goes off, and in that first couple hundred yards, nobody's just blasting out of there,
right?
And I kind of find myself in the lead. And I'm thinking, okay, this feels good, but I hope somebody takes the lead. I don't want to lead.
Yeah. Were they sucking right off your back?
Everybody's right on my back. And I'm thinking, well, we'll go for a while to see what happens. Well, we go through the mile, 5:20. I'm kind of
perfect.
Nailed it. Go through the next mile, 5:20. Nailed it. And so we're just running along. And everything's going good until about 8-9 miles. And Beards, and I don't have to tell you how that, you get the feeling like if I keep this pace going, this isn't going to end well. And then we went through the half. I had to leave 2 or 3 guys go. I went through the half in 109 flat. And I'm thinking, okay.
Oh, you did?
Yeah, I'm at 218 pace.
And how are you feeling at that point?
Beards, I had to be honest with myself. I said, Mike, can you do another one of those?
Right.
I know. Mike's thinking, there's no way, Mike. You want to be. I felt like I should have been about done at that point.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, things went downhill after that. And that hill at 19 miles was brutal. Oh. And then I got to the 20-mile mark. My uncle, who lives in the Bay Area, had actually drove over, and he was at the 20-mile aid station standing there,
nice.
and I saw him. And he had his 8mm camera. I actually have this, and he's recording me as I'm running up. And I grab water and I walked. And Beards, you know, when you're walking through the aid stations,
Yeah.
it's not like I'm worried about losing seconds. I was trying to keep him losing minutes. And as he came up, he ran along beside me for a short period, my uncle. And he goes, "How you doing? How you doing?" I go, "It's not my day. It's not a good day." And he goes, "Well, hang in there." And I start running. I keep running, and he jumps in his car, and he's by himself. And as he's driving by me in his car, he's filming me with his camera, looking backward. And I'm thinking, "Oh my God, my uncle's going to drive off the freaking road and get killed."
Right.
And he's looking back. He's recording me. He's got some great footage. Well, anyway, I get to the 20.
This isn't Uncle Bernie, is
Yes, it is. It's Uncle Bernie. And he's at the finish line. He's filming me. I come in. I ended up 4th place. I ran 2:25. I got, Brent Frias won it in 2:18 and change. Second place was 2:18 and about 20 seconds behind him. And the winner, he qualified for the Olympic trials. He also won a free trip to a race in France. Who
did?
Brent. The winner of the race in France got a free trip to Napa. The winner of the race in Napa got a free trip to that race in France.
That wasn't around when I ran.
No, that was pretty cool. Well, and then 3rd place was like 2:21, and then I was 2:25 and change. And so I was I felt satisfied that I gave it my best, and I didn't.
Right.
I'd had some bad marathons. I dropped out of New York in '86 and things like that, and Kansas City, and you look back and you don't. No regrets. You'd say, "Well, why? What do you think happened?" I don't think I trained hard enough. I really don't think I trained. You could use the weather and the travel and all that. Nah,
that didn't help. But...
It didn't help. I don't think it would have made up 5-minute difference for me there or anything like that. Well, that's our Olympic trials history for you and I guess. I'm going to really roll here pretty quick. So in '88, when you ended up in 2:27, I want to ask you what place that was, but do you remember?
I don't think it was last, but it had been pretty close.
Okay. Well, Mark Conover won the race at 2:12.
Yeah.
Ed Eyestone, 2:12. Pete Fitzinger, another Olympic team, 2:13. 92 came around. Steve Spence, 2:12. Ed Eyestone, 2:12. Bob Kampanen, 2:12. Keith Brantley was 4th in 2:14. I'm going to bring up Keith Brantley's name because in '96, 4 years later, Kampanen, who finished 3rd 4 years earlier, wins it.
Yep.
Mark Coogan, 2nd. Keith Brantley moved up from 4th to 3rd, made his Olympic team. Steve Placencia, Minnesota boy, was 4th that day, 2:14, about a minute out of 3rd place. 2000, need we go? Everybody, I hope knows this. That's listening. Rod DeHaven, 1st place, 2:15 on a tough day on a tough course. I don't even know who the 2nd place guy, Peter De La Cerda, ran 2:16. Got 2nd.
I don't know him.
Mark Coogan, who was 2nd in the trials in '96, was 3rd. And unfortunately, because of the way they'd set up the Olympics, IAAF now had standards. Rod was the only representative to go to the Olympic Games in Sydney. 2004, Alan Culpepper's 2:11, Meb Keflezighi 2:11, Dan Brown 2:12. 2008, Ryan Hall 2:09, Dathan Ritzenheimer 2:11, Brian Sell 2:11. I've got this. I don't have this memorized, Beards. I'm good, but I'm not that good.
You're doing good.
2012, Meb Keflezighi won the goddamn thing, 2:09. Ryan Hall, 2:09 in 2nd. Abdi, and I can't ever say his last name.
Abraham.
Abdahira?
Yeah.
All
We
right.
just call him Abdi.
Abdi, 2:09. 2016, here we go. Galen Rupp, 2:11. Meb Keflezighi, 2:12. Jared Ward, 2:13. 2020, Galen Rupp, 2:09. Jack Riley, 2:10. Abdi, 2:10. And now we're up to 2024. And we're getting a little long here, but I did go on the website, and the 5 fastest runners at the trials this Saturday. Connor Metz with the 2:07.47 that he got at Chicago. He finished 6th. Clayton Young, 2:08. Also,
and they're training partners.
Training partners, both BYU graduates, both former NCAA champions in cross country and 10K. These guys are studs. Galen Rupp has the 3rd fastest time going in with his 2:08.48. Of course, he has a PR of 2:06.07 that was back a few years. This could be his 5th Olympic team, Galen Rupp. We were just trying to figure it out. He's 37 years old. to make 20 years. But I think he was like 21 when he made his first team, or 20 or
Right.
so. And so it's mathematically possible he could do a fifth Olympic team, which would, I think George Young had made 4 Olympic teams, so this would be a record for that.
Well, yeah, and we got to, and he was a medalist in Rio.
Oh, exactly.
And then,
was silver medalist in the 10K and a bronze medalist in the marathon. Then,
right.
Yeah, 4 years later. Chalega, am I saying that right? Sam Chalega.
Yep.
He's a 208.50, and Scott Fauble 208.52. He's, I'm looking at this Scott Fauble. I don't really recognize him, but he's got a 209.46, a 209.09, and a 208.52. Those his top 3 times, all sub 210s. And so now I don't want to forget Joel I'm not going to mess his name up. Renchow
from SDSU.
Welchow. Let me spell it. RELCHOW. Welchow. Joel. Yeah, he's got the 15th fastest time for an American coming into this Olympic trials with a 2:10:37. And he got that at Chicago.
And he's a South Dakota State boy.
Yeah, South Dakota State boy. And we also
there's another one.
Ben Olson.
Ben Olson.
23 years young. And ran a 2:16:04, I believe. Was that at California International?
It was CIM. He ran 2:15.
Was that it? Wow! And so he's got 2 of them. Okay. Well, he's
done. I had him. I had Ben and him and his mom and dad on a guide trip this last summer.
That is awesome. So did you give
nicest people in the world?
So did you give him some tips?
Well, I just said, hey, you just go out and give it your best shot. And done. Before, I know we're getting kind of
it's 40 minutes
on time here, but here's the deal. I don't want our listeners to say, oh, you haven't talked about any of the women. Well, the Olympic trials the marathon came in to be in 1984, and Joni Benoit, won that gold medal, and she ran in the Olympic trials, won the Olympic trials, first one ever for women, 17 days after she had arthroscopic knee surgery. And so the we're not trying to keep those gals out, but the race on Saturday done. It's going to be something.
Do you know about the course? I did a little research. They do a 2.2 mile loop, then they do 3 8-mile loops to come up with 26.2 miles. So they go by the start. They're going to do 8 loops, and it's kind of this. They'll see each other. When they make a lot of corners, you'll be able to look back and say, okay, how big a gap do I have and what have you. The low spot on the course is 79 feet above sea level. The highest spot is 112 feet above sea level. This thing it's flat. I mean, if you look at the course, there's very little variation in the elevation.
It's flat as a pancake, and it's sure going to make the NBC televising it a lot easier without, with those loop course like that.
Exactly. They can have more stationary cameras, which will be catching the runners throughout the race multiple times. Well, Beards, I am now exhausted. I feel like I just qualified for another Olympic trials here.
Well, I know it. This is so fun. And I tell you, I'm going to be on that on my recliner chair watching that race on Saturday morning. So here's who I'm going with.
Okay, I'm writing this down.
Now, not in any particular order.
Top 3.
Just top 3. I'm going with the old
Rupp
master. Galen Rupp is one of them, and then the 2 training partner guys, Clayton Young and Connor Mance. I mean, they're going to be tough. But that's the thing about a marathon. It's, you can look at who the favorites are, but with it being such a long run, all it takes is a cramp, whether it be in your legs or a side stitch, and man, it can bring that hope of making a team not to fruition, And then on the women's side, I tell you what, I'm going with Emily Sisson.
That's my
She's
pick.
the American record holder, 2:18:29. Kira Diamato, she was the record holder at 2:19:12, and then Emily broke it, like a month or so later. And then I'm going. She's never made an Olympic team, but gosh dang, she's been running good. She's got a PR of a little over 2 hours and 20 minutes. She's 40 years old, but Sarah Hall.
Wow, good. Yeah. If anybody's got
we'll see.
Yep. Well, you did it easy. You took the three fastest guys. I'm going to throw one.
What the heck?
I'm taking Rupp out. I don't think he can do it. I'm going to
Okay.
move Scott Fauble. I don't know why that guy catches my eye, but with
He's
his,
pretty consistent.
he is so steady. So I'm going to go with the BYU guys and Scott Fauble. I'm looking at these guys' ages. Metz is 27. Clayton Young is 30. Galen Rupp, 37. Chalinga, 38. And Fauble, 32. Wilchow, Joel is 30. And Ben Olsen, 23. So I'm going to say Joel's going to PR. He's going to move up, and I think I see a top 10 finish for him. And I see Ben Olsen. I just see a PR for him. It's hard to predict.
Ben's a young,
point.
He's the young buck in there. So he's, depending on what he wants to do and with his running and his life and whatnot. I mean, running that PR at CIM this past December, and let's say he has a good run on Saturday, it could kind of motivate him like it did me 40 some years ago.
That's exactly what I'd like to see too. I'd like to see him run that 211, 212 and go, wow.
Yes.
I'm 23 and I want to see what I can really do now. And Joel's kind of that same thing too.
Talking about all this stuff, it's making me seem a little bit older almost.
Yeah. Well, good luck falling asleep Friday night thinking about this.
Hey, I know it. I can't wait. And we'll next week on the podcast too, we'll take part of the show maybe and talk about the trials race and stuff.
Yeah, and Undy's going to be there. I talked to Undy the other day, Scott Underwood.
Good.
Yeah, he winters down in Florida, and he called me. He was asking me about how do you store e-bikes in hot, humid, salt water conditions. And I said, I haven't got a clue. But we started talking about running, and he said, yeah, he's going to be over there supporting those guys.
Well, good. And so it's going to be a fun weekend, and we want to thank everybody for listening. And if you have any questions for Dunn or I or comments about the show, you can contact us directly on our website at beardsanddunpod.com, or you can leave us a comment on our Facebook, Instagram, or X page, all at Beards and Dunn Pod.
Yeah, and if you're watching on YouTube, need I say, please hit the like, hit subscribe. We'd love to hear some comments. We will try to get back to you on those. Beards, it's always a pleasure, and I can't wait to chat next time.
Me neither. Have a good week, buddy.
You too, bud. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.